Still don't quite get IROC, huh? Well, you know what? To be completely honest, a lot of people don't get IROC. Like it's hard. It's a tricky concept. And what I'm hoping to do in this video is just make it a little bit easier for you. So this example I discussed in my 1.6 video, and let's just break it down into steps. You're talking about an object that's being thrown up into the air. It's modeled by this equation. You have to create an interval chart for a specific time. So they're going to ask you for the instantaneous rate of change, your IROC, at a specific x value. Okay, then you're going to calculate a bunch of slopes. Each of these slopes represents your AROC, your average rate of change over a specific interval. Okay, so once you've calculated them all, they should be approaching a certain number. If they aren't, you probably did something wrong. Okay, so whatever they're approaching, that number is going to be your instantaneous rate of change. But I mean, okay, you've broken them down into like 4 or 5 steps. The steps seem pretty easy, but where do all these numbers come from and how do you calculate this kind of stuff? What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what IROC is using, I guess, the most easy example I can think of in terms of a function. So let's just take a look at x squared. X squared is a pretty easy function. So here I have a parabola in Geometry Sketchpad. And you know what? I want to find the IROC at 0. So when your x value equals to 0, what is your instantaneous rate of change? Recall that an IROC has to do with a tangent line. So I've drawn a tangent line right here, and it touches my parabola only once. Versus this guy is a secant line because it touches my parabola twice. If I found the slope of this one, it would be an AROC because an AROC is a slope over an interval from your x value of 0 to, it looks like my x value of 4. Yeah, that actually looks right because 4 squared is 16. So if I decide to find the slope of this line, it would be an AROC from the interval of 0 to 4. Now, how exactly do I get an IROC? An IROC is discovered by taking many AROCs. So let's say I found this AROC, this slope. Then I decided to go down a little bit and I found this AROC. And then I got closer to 0 and found this AROC. And then I did it again and found this AROC. Well, notice that these intervals are approaching 0. Like I'm going from 0 to 4 to 0 to 2, and now I'm very close, like 0 to 0.01. And now your secant line almost looks like a tangent line. That's the concept of finding an IROC. Okay, so from the right-hand side of the parabola, where was I? I was right here. This is the right-hand side of the parabola. We're going to use Excel to calculate all of your AROCs. Then what we're going to do is we could always switch to the other side and we can do it from the left-hand side and you should get the same answers. Okay, so your IROC should be the same on either side. Why don't we start off from the right? So we were talking about the interval from 0 to 4. Okay, so those are our x values. Our x2 is going to be the larger number and then our x1 is going to be the smaller number. Okay, so here are all your x2s. These are all your x1s, and I've already input those into their respective columns. Now, in order to calculate a slope, don't you have to have y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1? Well, then I'm going to have to calculate each of those yellow columns. Equals to your x2 minus your x1. Okay, so let's see that again. I'm going to take my x2 minus my x1. So basically all I'm doing is subtracting these two numbers to find my difference in x's. And through the magic of Excel, I can just copy and paste and it will calculate everything for me. I love Excel. Okay, so your y2, how do you get those numbers? Well, your y2 is going to be your x2 squared because remember this is an x squared graph. So if I want my y value, I'm going to have to take my x value and square it. Okay, so I get 16. And that makes sense, see? 4 and 16. All right, let's do that again. Equals to your x value squared. 2 squared is 4, and that makes sense because if I go down to an x value of 2, I get a y value of 4. Okay, now that you get it, I'm just going to copy and paste. So those are all for my x2 column, and I'm going to do the same for my x1 column. So if I want y1, I got to take my x1 and square it. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste that just so that it's faster. All right, now that I get my y2 and y1 numbers, I'm going to find their difference. So the change in y's is this one minus this one. Okay, and let's do that again, is this one minus that one, and then I get my y2 minus y1 for this specific interval. Okay, copy and paste. All right, now that you have both yellow columns, you can then discover your slope or your IROC. So slope is calculated by taking your difference in y's, y2 minus y1, divided by your difference in x's, your x2 minus x1. Okay, so 16 divided by 4 is going to be 4, and that means that the slope of this secant line is going to be 4. So the next one from the interval of 0 and 2 is going to be 2. So my slope, yeah, looks like 2. Okay, now let's calculate the rest, and then we're going to see what happens to all the slopes as we get closer and closer to 0. Notice that it goes from 4 to 2 to 1 and gets super duper close to 0. So from the right hand side, I get an IROC that equals to 0. Oops, I totally spelled that wrong. IRCO. IROC, there we go. All right, it's the same concept if you go from the other side, so why don't we start from -4 to 0. We don't say 0 to -4 because you always start from the smaller number towards the bigger number. Notice that it goes from -4 to 0, and I'm just going to use the same numbers I did over here, but I'm just going to use the negatives now. That means all of your x2s are going to be your zeros. All your x1s are going to be these numbers instead. And you remember how to calculate this. So equals x2 minus x1. And copy and then paste. To find your y values, you're just going to square these guys because we're talking about an x squared. So equals to this one to the power of 2. And then we're just going to copy and paste. And that makes sense because there should be a coordinate at 0, 0, which there is right there. Okay, now if x is -4, what is your y? Well, if x is -4, you're going to square it and you're going to get 16. So let's just make sure of that. Equals to this one to the power of 2, 16. All right, and even if I go to this interval, -2 to 0, so that's right there, -2 to 0, I'm going to get -2 squared should give me 4. Okay, so equals to -2 squared gives me 4. Perfect. Copy and paste. All right, I'm going to find my difference of y values now. So y2 minus y1, and copy and paste all those. Seriously, like Excel is awesome. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to find your slope or your IROCs. So your individual IROC from -4 to 0, so -4 was over here, to 0, looks like a negative slope. So what it's going to be is equal to your y2 minus y1 divided by your x2 minus x1, -4. And yeah, that looks like a -4 slope right there. All right, what's this slope then? This guy right here. Oh, that's a -2. So -4 divided by 2 is going to give you a -2. That's a slope from -2 to 0. So again, I'm going to copy and paste. All right. All of these guys, when I'm approaching from the left-hand side closer and closer to 0 to get really close to that tangent line, is I'm getting closer to -0, which is just 0 because 0 can't be a negative number. So your IROC on this side, holy cow, why do I keep spelling that wrong? OC. 0. All right. You don't have to provide both of these for your answer on a test or a quiz. One side is fine. So let's just take a look back at our example. Anything that I've highlighted in colors are the things that you need to write down in your table. Those are the most important things. So take a look. Here's your interval. It's written right here. Okay. Here are your x2 minus x1. That's right here. These are your y2 minus y1s. That's right there. And then you have all of your IROCs or your slopes. And again, I tried to see what they approached to find my IROC. Okay, so I'm hoping that after this video you have a better understanding of the difference between IROCs and AROCs, and that you generally know how to find an IROC now. Okay, unfortunately on a test or a quiz, you don't get Excel. Okay, if you do, you have an awesome teacher. But good luck calculating this all by hand.